It's time for Newsroom, where we take a look at the top stories that have made the year 2017 as we get ready to jump into this new year. And today we have a group, or rather a panel made of media people, just to see how we did and engage ourselves as journalists. Sitting closer to me is Eric Odor, who is the Secretary General of the Kenyan Union Journalists. Next to him is Professor Nancy Buka, Communication Lecturer at the Aga Khan University. And next to Nancy is Martin Mutua, the Head of the Media Relations at the National Assembly. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Let me just start with you, Eric. Looking at ourselves as the media, did we do justice in terms of the election coverage this past year?
Yes, of course, we had a protracted and a very long campaign period that actually began early in the year, looking at the calendar that was released by the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. So you see throughout the year, journalists and the media actually were focusing on the elections and the campaigns that had a lot of issues from both sides. And if from the beginning of the year, you could see that the timelines that actually were set by the IEBC, they keep shifting. And whenever that happens, that means that the pressure is more on the media because we need to catch up with the new timelines and the campaigns by the political parties. Then after that, we had the dominations, which is usually a very hectic process for journalists because of the high stakes in these political parties' seats, and even the political parties' tickets that were being sought by various politicians for various seats. So then after that, you see, then we go now to to the campaigns. Then after that, we had the battle goes to the Supreme Court. Then again, we had repeat presidential polls. So you could see that from the beginning up to towards the end of the year, actually journalists were very busy. And you can see that even right now, again, we've gone into another year. We haven't finished the agenda that actually has been started when now we're talking about the national dialogue. So you could see that the media has been very busy throughout, from the beginning up to at the end. Of course, we've also done our own analysis, and there have been criticism that we believe that as we go now to 2018, as the media will sit down and see that how do we respond, how do we restore the confidence and the trust that actually has been eroded as a result of the performance of the media in 2017 general election.
Right. Professor Nancy, your thoughts?
I think when we talk about, whether the media did justice, it's also important for us to look at the context in which the media covered the elections. And I think one of the most important things for us to bear in mind is that, just before the election, that a number of media houses in Kenya, downsized, cut down on the number of staff. And we then got to see a lot of people for who this was their first election to cover. The other challenge was, how do you then ensure that you have reporters across, the 290 constituencies to be able to cover provide up-to-date information as the election unfolded, right before, the election period, the pre-election, the election, and of course the period after the election. So it would be important that, one, we look at what kind of context was the media operating in for us to see whether, there was actually justice. The other important consideration is that I think one of the things that Eric has alluded to is the restoring that confidence that seems to have waded in the public, because, social media seemed to have been the go-to place for a number of people to be able to get up-to-date information. So the question is, are there areas where we could have dropped the ball as media? There have been criticisms about, media being compromised by various political parties, and that's skewing the kind of coverage. Having said that, I think it's also important that we bear in mind that this election, one, was long and protracted, but two, that the bulk of it also played out in the courts. And that in itself, for the very first time, I think media was put on the spotlight to be able to break down, the court proceedings and the judgments for the ordinary people to be able to consume. If I would score on a score of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, I I would give media a 6.
You'd grade us a 6?
Yes, which means that, this, I think there are lots of lessons for us to learn, and just the last year's election would provide a lot of discussion that would, generate discussion for the next 5 years.
Right. And sure, 2017 was a unique year in itself, being an election year. And I'm glad you touched on the issue of social media, which we'll come to talk about as we try and talk about the fake news that we saw throughout the year. But Martin, your thoughts?
Well, thanks, Zinzi. My thoughts on this is that basically elections, during the pre-election coverage, it's easier for the media to do that kind of coverage. They did very well. But elections are decided at voting. Mm-hmm. That's where the crux of the matter is. And for me, the media did so well until when we got to the counting bit. And I was privileged to be on KTN that evening with our colleagues Namu and Gadara. When we were analyzing during the counting, and we expressed as much our disgust in terms of how the media was covering the counting, because it seems we lost the momentum when it came to counting of the votes, because when we were live on TV, we could not see any coverage in terms of the counting on the ground. We were not being shown that, and we expressed that, and it was obvious that every report was coming through the IBC portal. Yet the media was, I do not know whether they were afraid or what had happened. They could not take the same tallying and put them on air. Until we said that almost towards the morning is when they started doing that. Yet they were already, we kept focusing on the presidential elections and forgot all the others, the parliamentary, the governors, the MCAs, whatever. All that was lost until towards the morning is when now, when we were talking about this, is when now they started popping up these, and we could see them on our phones, who is doing what in terms of parliamentary, and we were announcing those. So the media lost that touch at that particular time, and it's something that we need to, in future coverage, there's something that they need to do, because in previous years that has been happening. I do not understand why this time the media shied away from that.
We felt the ball on that one. How would you grade us then?
For me, because that's where everything is. If I were to give the media on coverage, it was a 4.
A 4. All right. Eric you're laughing.
Yes, I think when Mutwa should also be very fair to the media, and be looking at what he's talking about when it comes to counting, and looking at the logistics that are required for the media to do that, because you are talking about over 4,000 polling stations that actually spread across the country. So that means that at any given time, you expect, if you're talking about, for example, KTN, that KTN should even have like 4,000 reporters across the country. Or even if it's talking about the constituency level, that means that KTN then should also have like 290 reporters and 290 cameramen on the ground. So these are the criticism. Actually, we've sat down and looked at this criticism. Yes, it's a fair criticism, but we must also understand the context and the challenges that Dr. Buka has talked about. That as much as we're talking about this, we must also understand that there are some logistics that are also required. I remember we've covered the election with the Mutua before, but if you look at the number of polling stations then and the number of constituencies then, they are much fewer than what we have right now. So as a way forward, I believe that what we need in future, we need pooling resources so that the media can be able to collect and tabulate the results from all the 4,000 and plus polling stations. So that means that we should be able now as a media to pool the reporters so that we can cover the whole country. Because if you look at some of the polling stations, some of the media houses are talking about, they do not even have the capacity to have like 10 reporters. So that means that if we pool these resources, then we'll be able to cover the country. That's actually, to me, that's the lesson that I've learned based on the criticism we've had, because nobody talks about the criticism. If you're talking about covering these reporters, sending them out there, and the amount of money you're also going to invest in it, it's a lot of money that sometimes media houses might shy away from investing in that, looking at the returns that are there. So it needs a lot of support, and even from other players, so that we can have this, even a tallying center by the media, where we're able to bring together all these results from other polling stations or even the constituency level, so that we're able to convey them, because it's all about logistics that are required, but nobody wants to talk about that. So because we have a media that actually is a private sector driven, and the people who are there, they're also looking for the dividends, they're looking for profits. So if we are going to an election and they don't have the capacity to put more resources in that electoral process, then that means that we are not able to satisfy the needs and the aspirations of the citizens. So it's a lesson learned that in the future, we must see how we can pool resources and have reporters spread across the country.
Right, and so what Nancy actually you said,
Yes.
the issue of media houses tend to sort of let go of staff members as we just gear up to the election and tighten the budget.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that you cannot, the whole election coverage is a process that begins right before the election. Getting to know what are the political parties, who are the electoral contestants, what's at stake, And I know that there was a lot of training done, but much of that training was done very late in the day. And I guess that, and I know that that's part of, going forward, what needs to be done is that in terms of preparing media houses and reporters to be able to cover elections, that process should have begun now for the next election. And beginning now means that we look at, what happened in 2017 as a case study and draw lessons from it. I know that part of the challenge in the training, because I was involved in a bit of that and coming up with the election guidelines coverage, was there was not much emphasis on court reporting, for example. And yet, when the battle went to the courts, then it presented a whole new challenge for media houses. So it's important that we look at elections and map different scenarios out of what would be the outcome of an election, if this, then what, and prepare for that. Part of the disappointment that Mutua alludes to, that would then maybe justify why he's giving the 4 is is that I think there's a lot of expectation on media. And when a lot of expectation is placed on you, then it also comes with a bit of responsibility. And we saw quite a bit of discontent, from citizens out there who looked up to the media to be able to provide up-to-date information. Of course, behind the scenes is the whole question of logistics, and one would argue that then we should have been prepared for that kind of scenario. But then again, realizing that this was a very long and protracted election, that issues of fatigue came in, issues of not having enough people on the ground to be able to cover up-to-date reports, election reports as they unfolded, is something that we would need to think about. I like what Eric says about media houses coming together to do joint tallying. And I remember writing an opinion about that with the second election, that maybe it would be an opportunity for media houses to consider joint tallying and joint election coverage going forward, so that then we galvanize resources and you still can be able to come up with your own independent and exclusive stories out of it, but that you come up together and you have reporters all going out to cover in such a way that then you're able to maximize on the little resources that are available.
Mtua, do you see that happening? Media houses pulling in all their resources together to make sure that we're giving Kenyans credible, factual reporting when it comes to coverage of election? Because like we've all established, resources clearly is a challenge to media houses. But when it comes to now reporting and execution, as Nancy said, that can be unique in its own way. But when it comes to resources, we can pull them together.
That is one option. But even I know media houses, even independently, are capable of doing their own. We did it when I was here in the Standard. We did that. I've covered elections since '97. Planning is key for anything. You have to start planning for an election way back, and you would know where to map up your teams and be able to know who you are going to place where. You do not need 4,000 reporters to cover an election. Even CNN, when it covers the US election, it does not have reporters in the entire in the U.S. So that is not the way to go. You can, for now, in terms of coverage, even with that Court of Appeal ruling, whereby it mandated that tallying will be done at the constituency level. You start planning from that basis. How many constituencies do we have? You put you can map reporters around that area to cover for you the constituencies that govern in the particular locality. Mm-hmm. So it is easy. It can be done. What I'm saying is that the media did so well. Even during campaigns, we did so well. Even during the voting, we were live. We were doing so well. Then how do you disappear when it is counting? And then you start now blaming yourselves in terms of capabilities of human resource. That's not possible. Even you could not even air even 2, 3, 4, 5 counting stations. You can't. You would go mute during counting. That's where the problem is. So we must, when we're planning for coverage, we must plan all throughout up to the end, so that when results you deliver them, even people will not have any query in terms of how, even if criticism come, there will be minimal, and it's something that you can be able to go around about.
Right. Arguably, we are now a divided nation after this 2017 election. But the thing is, from a journalist perspective, Eric, how do we cover an election when your last name betrays you? So how do you cover an election in a country and feel safe within that area? We saw what happens to Francis Kishui. Where do we even start with that, Eric?
I think so that we can be able to respond to some of these challenges, what we need is that right now everybody is talking about reconciliation. Mm-hmm. We are talking about national dialogue. We are talking about electoral reforms. So when it comes to the issue of these reforms we're talking about, I believe that right this time around the media must play a very critical role as the stakeholders, and also have the media and our rights and the press freedom also protected through these reforms, so that when it comes to the election, so that we can somehow address some of the concerns that Mutua is raising. One thing that Mutua doesn't know, that in some polling stations or some constituency tallying centers, it was impossible for journalists actually to access the results he's talking about. Journalists were actually thrown out when the results were just about being announced and when even the counting was going on. So for us to avoid that in the future, we must also ensure that the media rights are also probably also included in electoral laws when we'll be talking about reforms, so that it doesn't become like a favor from the returning officers to the media to release these results, so that it is mandatory that media actually is part from the counting up to when the results are being announced, so that we'll be able to give the results out to there. Because what happens is we forget about the media from when we are talking about these reforms and when we are coming up with these laws. Then we just assume that actually it's the role of the media to educate and to pass this information to the public. When we forget about how the media can access the information, I know we've got access to information law that actually has been passed, but again, there are a lot of issues when it comes to implementation. So when we are talking about coming up with the new laws, we must also make sure that the media laws are also reviewed and the media is given more protection, so that we'll be able to give this information to the public, because there's too much expectation, but we do not also appreciate the environment within which the media is operating, because it becomes difficult sometimes even to get this information, and some threats that actually we've seen, like what we're talking about now, Francis and other journalists actually who are also attacked. We're also forgetting that in some other areas, journalists are also attacked by the political party supporters who did not want these journalists to be anywhere near a polling station. So how will journalists actually give you this information if they have been not allowed? Sometimes even the security officers also work in cahoots with the political party supporters and even the IEBC officials just to deny journalists access. So what I'm saying is that we must also understand the environment that the media was operating. Then how can we address those environments so that we make sure that journalists are also safe and are able to access that information?
Professor?
I think it goes beyond just, the last name. The last election was unique in many respects, that, certain media houses were blacklisted in certain areas, you know. So if you come from a particular media organization and you're there with your microphone and your cameras, then your life is in danger. And there are very many instances of journalists having been attacked, you know, as they covered the election, right from, you know, political party supporters, you know, the returning officers. There were all manner of attacks on journalists, which mainly went unreported, you know. And for me, the challenge is that we then are not using or, you know, using our space to be able to articulate the things that affect us directly as media. Much of those stories were not reported. I know that, you know, for example, KUJ would ask these journalists to come out and, you know, and speak. So not being able to tell the world, you know, this is what we're actually facing as we do this work. Not so much to gain their sympathy, but just to be able to help them understand that this is the situation under which we are covering, you know, this election. I think going forward is that we want to take into account that the responsibility of the media is bigger, and you know, there are lots of expectations, because today anybody who has access to, you know, a smartphone can be able to tell a story. You know, you don't have to have a reporter on site for the story to be told. And, you know, all they need to do is be able to send it on social media, and that takes a bit of power away from us. The responsibility on our side is then being the one that provides that authentic, that credible information that then shapes that public opinion going forward.
Martin, as you just add your thoughts on that specific question, also touch on the issue of security, because we saw what happened also, even our very own Duncan Khaemba, when he was reporting in Kibra, we saw what happened. So also, as you're touching on the issue of your last name betraying you during an election coverage, also the safety aspect of it, during demonstrations alone.
First, the issue of attack on any media or on any journalist is unacceptable. We start from there. It is unacceptable to attack media personnel who are going about doing their job. Whether you like them or not, that is neither here nor there. Journalists, just like any other person, they are doing their job. I also saw security forces mishandling your reporter in Migori,
Rashid Ronald.
Yes. That was never, and I'm not happy that the media never went frenzy over that the same way they went frenzy over the other cases, because that was wrong. We cannot allow whether your security forces or you are a private citizen to attack a journalist when they are on their beat. They are doing their job, and they must be allowed to carry out their job. And when these kind of attacks happen, the media fraternity must always close ranks and ensure that they come and support their own, and ensure that they express their dismay and disgust over that kind of thing. So, but moving forward, even as we go about this kind of situation, we also, when you flip the other side of the coin, we must also do some soul searching on ourselves. As media houses, you must, as a reporter or as a journalist, I remember the cardinal rule, probably Prof teaches the students, you must always keep your feelings to yourself in terms of political persuasions. You must not come out to the public and declare, I support this particular party or this particular party, because the moment you do that and you go to cover the opposite party, you'll be endangering yourself. Journalists are being viewed, they're supposed to be viewed as independent as possible. And that is the rule that when I went into a journalism class, those are the things that I was taught. You must do things you must ensure that everybody gets equal coverage, so that people can be comfortable with me if I'm covering ODM, and they can be comfortable with me covering Jubilee. They would not know where I stand. But the beliefs and the feelings are with me. It's me who knows who I support and where I take my support. But be that as it may, I'm not saying that the journalists who were attacked had shown that kind of bias. But moving forward, I've seen on even various platforms where journalists openly declare this is the kind of persuasion they belong, which for me is not the correct position. You must ensure that you always are able to be looked at as a person who can if ODM or NASA or Jubilee or Amani bring a story, you can be able to give it the proper coverage that it requires.
All right.
That is the way I think we need to move forward.
The panel... Oh, we need to go on a quick break. Hold that thought very quickly, but we need to take a quick break. But before we do that, we're